Have you ever wondered what the true moment is when a soldier realizes the war is lost? It's not always on the battlefield, not always the sound of an approaching tank or the silence after an explosion. Sometimes defeat is a cold, logical, and crushing realization, born not of combat but of mathematics. I imagine that you, as a military history enthusiast, have read about the great battles and production statistics, but perhaps you missed the human connection, that moment of psychological shock that sealed the fate of a nation in the eyes of its own men. This frustration of encountering only cold numbers without the emotional impact is something many of us share. We read that the Allies simply overproduced the Axis, but what does that really mean? What was it like for a German soldier trained in the belief of Aryan superiority and the invincibility of the Reich's war, machined to confront the physical, undeniable proof that his homeland was being buried by an industrial avalanche he didn't even know existed? This is the missing knowledge, the link that connects the factory to the front. The title of this video is not hyperbole. It's a real event. The story of how German prisoners of war, taken to the heart of the United States, discovered colossal factories that produced heavy bombers at a rate of 1 per hour. This isn't a story about a battle, but about the most powerful weapon of World War II, the American assembly line. It's just the story of how mass production engineering broke the morale of the German army before many of these bombers even reached Europe. Today, we'll delve deeper into this story. We'll set aside generic statistics and delve into the documented experiences of these prisoners. We'll explore the specific engineering behind places like the Willow Run plant, the veritable arsenal of democracy. This is the promise. By the end of this video, you'll understand not only what the United States built, but how the site of this industrial capacity became a devastating psychological weapon that proved to the Germans themselves that the war was irrevocably lost. If you're fascinated by the behind the scenes of military engineering and the stories that defined the 20th century, this is your place. Sign up now to ensure you don't miss any of our in-depth analysis about the innovation and strategy that changed the course of World War II. Picture the scene, mid-1943, somewhere in the American heartland, perhaps Michigan or Kansas. A train rumbles across the vast plains, its barred windows revealing a wide sky and a seemingly endless landscape. Inside, men of the Afrika Korps, captured months earlier in the hot sands of North Africa, look out with a mixture of boredom and arrogance. They still carry the confidence instilled by years of lightning victories, believing their capture was a tactical accident, not the beginning of the end. They have been told they will work, as permitted by the Geneva Conventions, on non-military duties. They disembark at a prison camp, but the air is different. There's no smell of destruction or the tension of a war zone. Instead, the air vibrates with a distant industrial hum, a low, constant sound that never stops, day or night. The American guards seem relaxed, almost bored, eating food German soldiers hadn't seen in abundance in years. Goebbels' propaganda had told them that America was a decaying giant, weakened by diversity and incapable of a unified war effort, its industry vulnerable to U-boat attacks. The first shock came not from a gun, but from the sight of the sky. At regular intervals, almost like clockwork, formations of brand-new 4-engine bombers roared overhead. Not a few planes, but dozens, then hundreds, all flying in the same direction, presumably toward embarkation ports. The prisoners, many of them veterans who had fought under the cover of the Luftwaffe, knew what air power was. But this was different. This wasn't an air force, it was a flood of aluminum, a river of war machines flowing from an unseen source. This source was the heart of industrial America, a place German strategists had fatally underestimated. The Nazi leadership, including Hitler himself, despised American mass production, considering Fordist production suitable only for fragile consumer goods, not for precision instruments of war. They believed that German quality, the craftsmanship of their factories, would always trump quantity. They were about to discover, through the eyes of their own captured soldiers, how terribly wrong this assumption was. The context for this revelation begins with Franklin D. Roosevelt's decision to transform the United States into the arsenal of democracy. Even before Pearl Harbor, the need to supply arms to Great Britain and the Soviet Union drove an unprecedented industrial transformation. When America officially entered the war in December 1941, this transformation reached dizzying speed. The Detroit auto industry, the world's largest industrial complex, was ordered to stop manufacturing civilian cars and dedicate itself entirely to war production. The challenge was monumental. War aircraft, especially heavy bombers like the B-24 Liberator or the B-17 Flying Fortress, were incredibly complex machines. A single B-24 contained over 1.5 million individual parts. Before the war, aircraft were built almost handcrafted by teams of highly skilled technicians who assembled each aircraft individually. Producing tens of thousands of these machines per year seemed impossible under existing methods. This is where the genius of American production engineering comes in. Men like Charles Sorensen of the Ford Motor Company looked at the B-24 Liberator and saw not an airplane, but a product. He and Henry Ford decided to apply the same moving assembly line principles they had perfected for the Model T to this complex bomber. The idea was ridiculed by many in the aviation industry. They argued that airplanes weren't cars, that the precision required made mass assembly impractical. Ford's response was the construction of the Willow Run plant in Michigan. This wasn't just a building. It was an industrial ecosystem of mythical proportions. The main plant was over a mile long and half a mile wide, making it the largest single-roofed building in the world at the time. It was designed from the ground up not only to assemble the B-24, but to manufacture most of its components on site, transforming raw materials into combat-ready bombers in a continuous flow. The Willow Run project was an engineering nightmare in itself. The B-24 wasn't designed by Ford. It was a consolidated aircraft project. Ford's engineers had to virtually redesign the plane, not to fly better, but to be *built more easily. They divided it into large modular subassemblies: the nose section, the wings, the center fuselage, the tail. Each of these modules was built on its own parallel assembly line before converging on the final assembly line. This modular approach was key. Instead of one team building an entire plane, thousands of workers, many of them women who had never touched a tool before, known as Rosies the Riveters, were trained to perform a single repetitive task. A worker could spend an entire day installing a specific type of wiring or riveting a specific panel. Complexity was transferred from the individual worker to the production engineering system. German posts assigned to agricultural or infrastructure work near these industrial centers didn't need an official tour to understand what was happening. They saw the endless trains bringing aluminum and steel sheets to the factory. They saw the gigantic parking lots filled with workers' cars, a sign of civilian prosperity unimaginable in rationed Germany. And most importantly, they saw the finished product coming out the other end of the factory. At first, production at Willow Run was slow. The plant faced enormous teething problems, earning the nickname Will It Run? But by 1943, when the first Afrika Korps prisoners arrived in the U.S., the plant was beginning to hit its stride. In 1944, at its peak, Willow Run was actually producing a complete B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, one bomber per hour. American guards, aware of the psychological impact, often missed an opportunity to point this out. A German prisoner might complain about the work, and the guard would casually respond, "Well, while you were digging that hole, we just built another bomber." For the German soldier, who knew the Herculean effort German industry expended to produce a single Focke-Wulf or Messerschmitt, this statistic was soul-crushing. This revelation turned arrogance into despair. U.S. military intelligence reports, based on interrogations and censored prisoner letters, noted a profound shift in morale. The soldiers stopped believing Goebbels' propaganda. They realized that Germany was not fighting Great Britain or Russia. It was fighting an industrial continent that could produce weapons faster than Germany could destroy them. This story of bomber production is a perfect example of how engineering changed warfare. If you find this analysis of the impact of mass production fascinating, please hit the like button. This helps us understand what kind of in-depth content you value most and allows us to continue bringing you these stories of military engineering. It wasn't just at Willow Run. Across the country, a similar industrial miracle was taking place. On the coasts, shipyards like Henry J. Kaiser's were applying similar principles to shipbuilding. Kaiser, a dam construction engineer, knew nothing about ships, but everything about logistics and prefabrication. His shipyards began producing Liberty ships, vital cargo vessels, in record time. Kaiser's process was revolutionary. Instead of building the ship keel up on the dock, which was the traditional and slow method, he used massive subassemblies. Entire sections of the ship were prefabricated elsewhere in the yard, complete with piping and wiring, and then hoisted by gigantic cranes and welded into place. Welding, instead of riveting, was another crucial engineering innovation that made the process faster and stronger. The result was that the construction time for a 10,000-ton cargo ship dropped from months to weeks. The record was set by the SS Robert E. Peary, built from start to launch in an incredible 4 days and 15 hours. German submarines, the dreaded U-boats, were sinking Allied ships at an alarming rate, but the United States was building ships faster than the U-boats could sink them. German POWs, especially captured U-boat crews, were shocked to learn these statistics. They had risked their lives on deadly patrols, believing they were slowly strangling Britain and America. Instead, they discovered their effort was like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. American logistical engineering had rendered their tactics obsolete. The magnitude of American production is difficult to comprehend even today. Between 1940 and 1945, the United States produced nearly 300,000 military aircraft. It produced over 86,000 tanks and over 2 million military trucks. The Soviet Union produced more tanks, but the United States supplied the trucks under Lend-Lease, which allowed the Red Army to actually move these tanks and their supplies. This capacity wasn't limited to weapons. America produced prodigious volumes of everything: food, uniforms, boots, radios, and penicillin. German prisoners of war working on American farms marveled at the abundance. They saw tractors, combine harvesters, and a level of agricultural mechanization that Europe wouldn't achieve for decades. They saw food being thrown away that would feed a German family for a week. The comparison with the German situation was stark. Germany had Albert Speer, an organizational genius who managed to increase German war production even under constant bombardment. Speer rationalized industry but faced insurmountable limitations. Germany relied on slave labor, which was inefficient and prone to sabotage, while America had a motivated and well-paid workforce. More importantly, German engineering focused on complexity and perceived quality, often at the expense of production capacity. The Tiger I tank was a technological marvel, a mobile fortress that outclassed any Allied tank when it was introduced. But it was over-designed, mechanically temperamental, and took forever to build. Germany produced fewer than 1,400 Tigers during the entire war. In contrast, the United States produced nearly 50,000 M4 Sherman tanks. The Sherman was inferior to the Tiger in a direct duel. But war is not a duel. The engineering behind the Sherman was its reliability, its ease of repair, and, above all, the fact that it could be mass-produced in automobile factories. American tactical doctrine was simple. If a Tiger destroyed 3 Shermans, the 4th and 5th would flank and destroy it. They always had 5 more. The technically savvy German prisoners, engineers, and tank officers understood this philosophy perfectly. They saw America not as a nation of artisans, but as a nation of systems managers. Germany had the Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, a marvel of aeronautical engineering. But they built about 1,400. The Americans built over 15,000 P-51 Mustangs, a conventional piston fighter that, thanks to its superior engine and aerodynamic engineering, could escort bombers to Berlin and back. The U.S. government didn't leave this perception to chance. It was a deliberate policy of psychological warfare. Many POW camps received copies of magazines like Life or the Saturday Evening Post. These magazines didn't contain crude war propaganda. Instead, they featured colorful advertisements for refrigerators, new cars with the promise of availability after the war, and smiling families in suburban homes. For the German soldier coming from a homeland devastated by bombs and severe rationing, these advertisements were more demoralizing than any pamphlet. They portrayed a country that could wage a global war on two fronts and simultaneously dream of rising consumer standards of living. This demonstrated that the American war effort, though vast, did not even demand the nation's total sacrifice. Have you ever considered how consumer goods advertisements could be used as a weapon of war? It's a fascinating aspect of psychological warfare that's often overlooked. Share your thoughts in the comments about other less obvious propaganda tactics you know from World War II. In some cases, the exposure was even more direct. Captured high-ranking German officers, especially those with engineering or industrial backgrounds, were occasionally taken on carefully managed tours. They didn't see secret military installations, but they did see civilian industrial power. They saw the docks of New York, the railroads of Chicago, and sometimes glimpsed the war factories themselves. One such account, though possibly apocryphal but illustrative of the truth, describes a German general being led to an observation platform overlooking a vast aircraft factory, most likely Willow Run itself. He watched for a long time, in silence, the miles-long assembly line, watching the fuselages move inexorably toward completion. He watched the thousands of workers, men and women, laboring in shifts under bright lights 24 hours a day. He saw wing sections being joined to the fuselage, engines being assembled, and finally, a complete B-24 bomber being towed out of the giant doors onto the adjacent airfield, where dozens more already waited. The American officer accompanying him simply pointed and said the famous phrase, "We're making one of these every hour." The German general, trained to understand logistics and production, needed nothing more. He understood that all the heroism of his soldiers, all the tactical genius of his generals, and all the precision engineering of his wonderful weapons were useless. This was the climax of industrial warfare. It wasn't a battle, but a spreadsheet. It was the moment when mass production engineering became the decisive strategic weapon. The general reportedly turned to his companion and said, with resignation, "We have lost the war." This realization, occurring in 1943 or 1944, long before the fall of Berlin, was the true end. When these officers and soldiers returned to their prison camps, they brought this truth with them. Morale, already shaken by the distance from home and the reality of capture, crumbled. Letters home, though censored, began to carry a tone of despair and futility. "You can't imagine," they wrote. "There's no way to beat these people. The amount of material they have is out of this world." This demoralization became an epidemic. The POWs realized that Germany was not being defeated, but rather irrevocably buried. The war had been won not by a superior soldier, but by a superior engineering system. A system that valued efficiency, modularity, and scale over artisanal complexity. The legacy of this revelation is profound. It validated the idea that modern wars are won not by tactics or courage alone, but by logistics and industrial production. World War II was the first truly global war in which a nation's engineering and production capability was a more accurate predictor of victory than almost any other factor. The story of German POWs discovering the scale of American production serves as a crucial lesson. It shows that engineering isn't just about designing a better weapon. It's also about designing a better process to build that weapon. The B-24 Liberator wasn't the best bomber of the war, but thanks to Willow Run, it was the most produced of its kind, and in this overwhelming quantity had a quality all its own. This industrial epiphany shaped the post-war world. The Soviet Union, having witnessed the power of American Lend-Lease, understood that its next conflict, the Cold War, would also be industrial and technological. Germany itself, rebuilt with American aid, would adopt many of these mass production principles to become an economic powerhouse. The assembly line that built bombers was the same one that built the prosperity of the 20th century. Reflecting on this, the most effective weapon in democracy's arsenal was not the atomic bomb, which ended the war, but the assembly line which won it. German prisoners of war were simply the first enemy witnesses to this crushing truth, seeing their nation's fate sealed, not in Berlin, but in the factories of the American Midwest. Production engineering is the untold story of Allied victory. What other aspect of logistics or engineering do you think was decisive in the outcome of the war? Share your thoughts in the comments.